So the short answer is because developers are greedy and they want more money. Thanks for watching this video. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. No, but for real, today I want to talk about the AA gaming market and why it's been slowly shrinking and why that's a very bad thing that we should be concerned about. Because I certainly am, as I'm someone who really enjoys AA games more often than I do AAA games, because not every day do I want to be playing a 100 plus hour open world game that's going to take up my entire weekend and more. Because I personally love AA video games. They're some of the most innovative games on the market right now. And I don't always want to play a 100 plus hour open world game that's going to take up all of my time. Sometimes I just want to play a game that can finish within a week that's not going to set me back $70 plus. And that's what AA games tend to be. It's a very loose definition that not everyone is, 100% set on. There's obviously a overlap between indie games and AA games. What I've always thought it to be is a really highly polished indie game can be a AA game, but not all AA games are indie games because big publishers sometimes do put out smaller projects that are classified as AA that are usually made on a lower budget and are sold for like half the price. Games like Hi-Fi Rush from the recently shut down studio Tango Gameworks, which is one of the reasons why I'm making this video today. Now, before I go into detail about the AA game market, I think it's a good idea to quickly define what the difference is between AAA, AA, and indie. And while I did give a definition earlier, I did also find online this article here that gives a sort of guideline criteria for defining a game as either AAA or AA. And if I scroll down to this part here, what they do is they have a ranking system, and if it scores 7 or higher out of 10, it counts as a AAA game. And you've got criteria like the marketing budget, how well it was received. This is one I'm not too sure should count because there are games that are AAA that are not very good and are not critically received very well. But I think those are normally called quadruple A games these days. But if you want to use this criteria, it's an option. It's one I probably wouldn't include, but there's also things like the level of polish and bugs in a game, how many hours of gameplay it has, type of graphics it has, and what kind of studio made it. Now, this is all incredibly subjective. You might have a different definition of it, that's fine. But the examples they give for this criteria are games like The Last of Us 2, GTA 5, and Cyberpunk. And further down here, they have a separate one for classifying AA games, which has an adjusted score. So if it scores a 7 or more, it would be a AAA game on the previous one. Whereas this one only needs a score of 5 or higher to be classed as AA. So it's a different criteria. I say different, it's more or less the same thing. It's just weighted differently. And the examples they give here are games like A Plague Tale Innocence, Alien Colonial Marines, and Vampire. Although I do take issue with a couple of these. So things like Marvel's Avengers, I wouldn't count as a AA game because it was made by a AAA studio and it was with a large IP and it had a big budget. The only reason it's classified as AA here is because it had a low Metacritic score. I don't think that should contribute to being a AA game. I think it's still a AAA game. It's just a very bad one in this case. Same goes for Alien Colonial Marines as well, actually, because that was developed by Gearbox, which is owned by Take-Two, which is obviously one of the biggest publishers out there. I personally don't take the game's critical score in account when deciding if it's AA or AAA. If that's something that you want to take in consideration, feel free to do whatever you think is best. And the reason I'm talking about this today is because the market for AA games has actually been shrinking recently. The biggest AA title we received recently has been Hi-Fi Rush, which had its studio shut down, so we won't be seeing any more games from that studio like this, which is honestly very disappointing. But there's also the situation where big studios would put out games like Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which would make a lot of money, have an established fan base, and then they try and make the jump to AAA. So the sequel, Hellblade 2, is actually being released at a higher price point. Still not the $70 price point, so it is still less than that. But it's not the same price that the first game was released for. It's sort of creeping its way up. And this is a trend you'll see with a lot of games that originally come out in the AA market and then creep their way up to AAA, especially when they're made by a big publisher and they see serious potential. Because why would they sell a game for less when they could sell it for more when they know there's an established fan base for it? Now, I personally love the AA gaming space because you'll see so many creative and really cool games in that space, most recently being games like Hades and Hades 2, which are incredibly polished indie games. And you can buy both of them price of one Call of Duty game and still have change to spare. And in fact, one of the most recent things that comes to my mind is Larian Studios specifically, because they had previously gone from crowdfunding games like Divinity Original Sin and releasing them and essentially being on the forefront of high quality CRPG, which is a very niche genre, with the Divinity franchise, then going on to make Baldur's Gate 3, which is a AAA gaming experience, and essentially shaking up the entire RPG genre industry. In fact, when it did come out, we've had a lot of developers speaking out on Twitter about how we shouldn't be expecting this to be the industry standard, whatever that means, and how it should be seen as an anomaly or a once in a blue moon type situation, and that devs like EA, Activision, Ubisoft, they aren't going to be chasing the same levels of polish or quality in their games. And I don't know if you guys remember, but we've had this exact conversation before, because when Elden Ring came out, same thing happened. Developers from Ubisoft, EA, Activision, whatever, all spoke out saying this shouldn't be the industry standard, nothing should have to change or whatever. You shouldn't expect them to follow the same type of success, and that it's unrealistic for us to expect them to be able to meet the same thing that those developers did. And these aren't just like any random studios, these are big studios like Ubisoft and Guerrilla Games who put out Horizon Zero Dawn. In fact, there was an entire Twitter thread by developers saying why Baldur's Gate 3's success should be seen as an anomaly and why that doesn't mean that developers should raise their standards to produce the same quality of games. And the craziest part of all of this is that FromSoft only have 300 members of staff, while Ubisoft are employing up to 2,800 people. Even Larian Studios only had 400 employees at the time of Baldur's Gate 3's development. And that's a problem with AAA game development. They want to follow a specific formula that you'll see all the time in games by Activision and Ubisoft, like Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, all becoming annual franchises that come out every single year following the exact same formula. And they want to churn out the same product every year for you because they expect you to buy their game at full price every single year, because they need to be able to report back profits at the end of every financial year for their investors, keep them happy. And it's the constant churning out of cookie cutter content that has, in a sense, made the industry stale, at least on the AAA landscape, whereas the AA landscape has a lot more freedom and less pressure to have to meet sales expectations and are more free to explore innovative ideas and be creative and think outside the box. And that's where we see most games like Hades 2 and Hi-Fi Rush and Ori and the Blind Forest. And I find it really disappointing to see that market is slowly evaporating, because every single time there's been a successful AA game, some CEO at top will realize that they can make that game again and just charge you more for it. In fact, that's exactly how we got the Assassin's Creed franchise, because originally it was a new twist on the Prince of Persia formula, and they realized they had a success on their hand and thought, great, keep making that game every fucking year. And I find it really insane that they're so against the idea of raising industry standards, because I can remember this being a discussion we've been having going as far back as 2013 when games like The Last of Us and GTA 5 were coming out. In fact, I distinctly remember Hideo Kojima saying GTA 5 has raised the standard for open world game design, and how his game, The Phantom Pain, which is out in 2 years' time since then, might not meet the new standards set by Rockstar and their new open world game. And the idea that developers are against the notion of having the standards in the industry raised to allow for more creativity and more ideas to be accepted and developed on and built upon is really frustrating for me, because there have been so many times where innovation in the industry has just been ruined by marketing and essentially greed within the industry. I think some of the biggest examples I can think of right now is, you guys remember loading screens back in the PS2 days when games used to have loading screens? Bandai Namco patented the idea of having mini games in those loading screens, so we just had to sit there and read some text or rotate an object while we waited for our game to load. And they held on to that patent, and barely any of the games they made ever use this. And now we've gotten to the point where we have SSD drives and no longer have any loading screens or any use for these things, and their patent has expired. And it's that corporate greed holding on to that has cost us so much innovation within the game industry. And we're still seeing the same sort of thing happen with the Nemesis system being owned by WB Games and not letting anyone else use it, because there are so many developers out there that could take that and run with it and make so many more great games. But because they've locked it down for the sake of making profit and then not making any games with that, I mean, I guess they got that one Wonder Woman game coming out at some point. I have no idea when. That is if they don't cancel it just for a fucking tax rebate or something. But this sort of corporate greed is drying up the well of very genuinely innovative and creative games that we have coming out. Because as soon as they find something with like a single drop in that well, they will immediately want to shift it over to AAA. and milk it for all the money they can, all the while shutting down studios that are actually actively working on projects like this. Because the whole point of the Microsoft merger of getting Bethesda and all those studios was the fact that these smaller studios like Tango Gameworks would now have the security of being able to be more creative with their work and produce content they wouldn't have been able to without the backing of a big studio like Microsoft and Xbox. And that creativity led to one of the best games that we had. In fact, it was the only game of last year for Xbox that won any awards or was even nominated for any awards, because none of the Xbox exclusives have been. In fact, Xbox exclusive games that they have been pushing and keeping and pouring all of their money into marketing, having games like Halo Infinite and Starfield, which are more or less dead on arrival, with the biggest marketing budgets I can think of in recent before Microsoft. Whereas a game they shadow dropped fucking blew all of that out the water, and they reward it by killing it off, which is a mind-boggling move, because later on they discuss how they want to make smaller, more impactful games that win awards right after they killed off the one studio that did exactly that for them. And this wasn't just any studio, this was a studio that had Shinji Mikami, the creator of Resident Evil and Devil May Cry, and his team. So they had a very talented team making hit games like The Evil Within and Ghostwire Tokyo. And the reason why they shut it down is because they need to justify spending 70 billion acquiring Activision Blizzard, because they aren't making their money back on that investment. So they started off by cutting off as many of the smaller studios as they can to focus on things like Call of Duty. And it's that kind of mindset within the industry where they cut off the smaller independent projects like the AA gaming market just to focus and put all of their eggs in the AAA gaming basket. That's slowly choking the life out of the industry, because the end result is we see a lot less creative games out there and more of the same every single year, in and out. In fact, every game is slowly becoming FIFA, but you'll get the same game every year and you'll be expected to pay full price for it. Because every major developer just wants to make the next Fortnite, because they want to keep making money over and over again from the same game with battle passes and microtransactions. It's why they keep chasing after live services with games like Suicide Squad. And it's not that live services are bad either, because we have games like Helldivers 2, which is a live service game and one of the best games that's come out this year, which itself is a AA game, because this was made by an indie studio and it wasn't released at $70. And in fact, you can buy this game twice, get a copy for a friend, and you'll have money left over than buying some other AAA game, and you'll have more fun with it. And I have no idea how long it's going to take the industry to realize they're chasing something that doesn't exist by constantly going after making live service games or just churning out AAA games every year, expecting people to blindly purchase them at full price. In fact, the biggest offender has to be games like Star Wars Outlaws that are charging over $100 for their complete editions. And personally, I find that rather disappointing, because I love playing games that only take maybe 8 to 10 hours to complete, that I can just play over a week and have a solid experience with. Games like Disco Elysium, or most recently, I've really been enjoying playing V Rising, which is a action RPG mixed with a survival game with a very cool vampire aesthetic and soundtrack. Or World of Horror, which has become one of my favorite roguelites because it's a horror RPG based on the works of Junji Ito, who's my favorite artist. But because of the way the industry is currently poised to be and the mindset of the people at the very top, AA game development studios are usually the first to go when it comes to mass layoffs within the industry, because everybody wants to put their eggs in the AAA gaming basket, or God forbid, the quadruple A dog shit pile. But anyway, those are just my thoughts on the market for AA games and why I want to see more of them, and I'm disappointed in the fact that we're getting less and less as the years go by. Let me know in the comments below if you have any particular AA gaming experiences that you think are worth checking out. Like and share the video as well. I still am working my way up towards 1,000 subscribers on this channel, so every little helps. And check out some of my other videos as well. I also live stream on this channel, so if you want to chat with me directly, hit me up whenever I'm live. I'll be happy to talk to you guys. And on that note, I'll see you on the next one.